This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome into episode number 85 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside my co-host Nick Maxon. Nick, I just noticed something as we started the show. I think this is the first time that you and I have not worn hats of any sort on the show together. It's kind of is this a milestone? Have we made it? Have we arrived?
I don't know if that's a milestone, but either that or we're just trying to look, better for the people that are watching. I don't know, something like that. I have no idea, man. But it's interesting. We've been through this so many times, yet I guess we were just trying to, cover our craniums for so very long.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm surprised that viewers even look at the show. I mean, when they see our faces, the fact that our cameras are still intact is kind of incredible. But hopefully your ears are intact. We've got a bit of an interesting show for you this week, I think, to say the least. A very short Huskies Illustrated weekly roundup for you. We're going to talk a little bit about some women's hockey, a potential debut that just happened not so long ago for a St. Cloud State hockey alum. And then the tough part of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the ongoings in the professional hockey world the past week, not just the Chicago Blackhawks investigation, but a multitude of things going on. It's a bit of a discretionary discussion, important for listeners to be aware of some of those things that they will contain. We'll obviously let listeners know about those moments again as they arise. And then we're going to have some fun. The Extra Ice session, it is Halloween today. So if you're listening to this when the show comes out on Sunday, so we're going to talk a little bit about Halloween, some scary movies, and other shenanigans of that sort. Nick, why don't we get into it with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
As you mentioned, Noah, men's hockey off this week, but it was the women's that were continuing their regular season battles in the WCHA, going up against a very good Ohio State team. Now, Friday's action, a little bit of a slow start for the women. Otherwise, it was actually a pretty good game for the Huskies, although they would lose 5-2. They did trail 3-0 into the second period, but they did get back-to-back goals of Emma Gentry and Clara Himmler-Revel to inch within one. However, Ohio State would respond with a separation goal 2 minutes later. Again, that 2-goal lead in the hockey, they say it could be the backbreaker, especially if they're climbing in to a one-goal cushion there, but unfortunately unable to catch the Buckeyes there. Taylor Lynn, Mackenzie Bourgeray, McKenna Westball, and Allie Cornelius all tallied assists in this hockey game. Super senior netminder Emma Paluzny stopping at 35 of 40 shots also in that loss. And again, Emma Paluzny continuing to rack up saves in her Husky career. I know that she always gives that team a chance to win. And man, she faces a ton of shots and usually, again, keeps most of them out of the net. On Saturday, again, yesterday for the Huskies, their teams met again in the rubber match again in Ohio. This one not so close, unfortunately, Noah. Ganina Newland coming off of injury, the only goal scorer in this hockey game, and it was a 7-goal tally for the Buckeyes in the second period. This was a 10-1 loss, so a pretty tough outing there again on Saturday for the women, who again, unfortunately, unable to come up with a win on the road. So have to go back to the drawing board and get some things tuned up, but no question again for the women's there. this one will sting a little bit. Switching gears a little bit, again, as we mentioned before, the men's hockey, this is their bye week and probably the best time to get someone. They're nursing some injuries again in the lineup, so it probably couldn't have happened at a better time. And next weekend, they will be traveling to Colorado to face Colorado College and the Tigers there. First time at Ed Robeson Arena to open up NCHC conference play. So that's I don't know what you say. We're getting ready for the actual test, right? And then the women's team will go down to Mankato to visit the Mavericks there next weekend as well.
Yeah, quick clarification there. They'll actually welcome Mankato, the women's team. They'll be at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center.
They will.
But
I do apologize.
But I wrote that segment for you, and I don't write so well sometimes. I don't speak so well sometimes, Nick. So I don't blame you. It's understandable. It's not Mr. Maxon's fault. For once, Caleb Peabody, if you're listening, for once, it's not Nick's fault, but put it on his tab anyway. Anyway, speaking of things and keeping tabs, we're already actually at our last topic here for the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. News around the NHL. We're going to discuss the largest headlines, of course, in the main portion of the show. But in signing news, a couple of signings here. Vegas, they inked 24-year-old defenseman Zach Whitecloud. He got a 6-year, $16.5 million extension after finishing his career with Bemidji State and signing with Vegas back in 2018. Kind of a sneaky, good little signing, I think, for Vegas. A good cost-effective signing, getting the prime years of a potential player there. Toronto, they completed their big one. Kind of their pivotal signing that a lot of people had on the docket after tying up essentially half of their salary cap in 4 players and change. Defenseman Mike Riley, 8 years, $7.5 million annually. A fairly hefty price tag. I think he's a defenseman that's worth it, but we'll have to see how that contract ages out as he moves forward there. Then finally, New York Islanders forward Ross Johnson. He nabbed a 4-year extension worth just over $1 million annually. Another cost-effective signing out on the island there. Nick, I kind of see you perking up here. I do want to ask really quick, the Mike Riley signing, overpay or did Toronto nail it on this one?
Overpaid.
Okay.
I think for Mike Riley. Now, the term also scares me a little bit too, at least for Toronto. I think, first of all, we know that this is a pivotal year for Toronto. There's no question about it. This could look either really, really good or, matter of fact, this could be a signing where Mike Riley may not actually carry most of the salary in Toronto. This may be a contract where if the Toronto Maple Leafs either A, don't even make the postseason, or again, can't make it past the first round, there will be some pretty big changes up north of the border in Toronto. And you got to wonder with some of those big signings, again, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, Austin Matthews, will some of these big players, the big salaries, they have to be moved. Well, at some point now, with $7.5 million for Mike Riley, something's got to give. You kind of wonder what Kyle Dubas has up his sleeves, and we'll definitely be here to cover for you all as things unfold here over the course of this season and more importantly into the next off season.
Yeah, a lot of big names in our weekly roundup this week, and it actually continues into that injury bug here. 4 players with injury news, some more information on some of these guys here. Tampa Bay's Nikita Kucherov, the big one. He's expected to miss 8 to 10 weeks after his lower body surgery. Los Angeles Kings defenseman Drew Doughty, he'll miss 8 weeks after that knee-on-knee hit by Dallas's Yanni Hakanpää. That was kind of a nasty hit.
That was a nasty hit.
Yeah, New Jersey's Jack Hughes, he's going to be reevaluated in about 5 weeks' time for his dislocated shoulder. He met with medical professionals earlier this week, just got that information on Saturday. And Washington's TJ Oshie, this is going to hurt me in fantasy here, Nick. He's going to be week to week with a lower body injury. Once again, welcome in episode number 85, Noah Grant, alongside my co-host and Nick Maxon. Nick, it's a pleasure to welcome you into the show. It's a pleasure to welcome you back at home, or I'm back at home, I should say. Nice to be back with the family and back in the old studio, as one would say. Not the old studio, but close enough. We didn't have a trivia question this week, so I'm going to throw that out there right now. But Nick, how has your weekend been? Have you been enjoying your time? And have you been watching some hockey not related to the Huskies, or have you been away from the hockey world for a while?
No, watching the Wild, and Husky fans may grip on me. I was actually in Mariucci Arena last night cheering on Notre Dame with the Gophers, and I didn't think the Irish could pull it off. Gophers actually started really, really sloppy. Huskies have never done that before, have they? Sloppy first period start. But very discombobulated. Notre Dame generated most of the offense in the first period, although they had really still a hard time getting into some quality scoring chances after some offensive pressure. second period came and let's just say the game flip-flopped. Gophers finally settled down. They got back into the structure. They instead of just trying to force things throughout the blue line, they finally got pucks deep, finally stretched and pushed back Notre Dame defense. First goal off a wraparound was the goaltender not sealing the post. So that was kind of a soft one. But then the Gophers, after they go up 2-rip, really kind of took control in the third period. So
speaking of 2-rip, Bryce Brodzinski with a cannon. That was a really nice shot to make that 2-0. I wanted to ask, and the reason that I have any knowledge of this is my parents are actually Golden Gopher fans. So they were watching the game last night on Big Ten. Nick, did you feel like that was a game that was somewhat poorly officiated? It would kind of seem like a lot of clutch and grab last night that I don't know, but.
So, you have crews, right? Just in the NHL, the NFL, NBA that just kind of have their things that they call, and also some things they kind of let go, right? And it seemed like that officiating crew was just letting them play for the most part. And even so that the tripping call that was called the third, I actually didn't like that call. I think they actually kind of lost his edge, but when the stick's there, referee's arm is going to go up. There was a couple of, you could saw soft calls. Then they were more makeups than anything for some maybe non-calls, but a lot of holds out of hooks, and they were not. They were letting them play.
Yeah, of course. We're recording this on Saturday night, so the Gophers actually just underway. It's about 5:30 here, local time, Central Time here. So they're on their second night against Notre Dame. So we're talking about Friday night's action there. Nick, before we go over to some women's hockey thoughts, the other team that's on the docket that we're paying attention to, of course, the Minnesota Wild, who had a really tough night in Seattle last night. But a particular St. Cloud State Huskies hockey alum making his debut.
Yeah, John Lazat, again, part of, sort of that, number one team that never lost a game at home. John Lazat, again, a great defenseman, good defensive defenseman. The scouting report would even tell you with St. Cloud that his biggest weakness was he's not the most fleet of foot. And let's just say that for even the casual hockey fan, I think that was definitely hurt him a bit. He got his first game. In fact, he was benched for the latter half of the third period. He didn't see a shift. And that lasts about 10 to 12 minutes there. So definitely not the best performance, but that's a tough spot. I think he was originally called up as COVID insurance, again, as Matt Zuccarello. And I'm trying to remember who the other Wild player is that's on COVID protocol. Excuse me for not remembering. But, that was original. Then there was word that Goligoski may have been injured as well as Dmitry Kulikov. So he gets kind of pushed into a situation where, I'm not sure if you're expecting to play, but, they had to dress Jordy Ben, who has made his regular season debut, and then John Lazat again. So it was a tough game defensively in the game with Hackstall's teams. Again, as they did North Dakota, they were suffocating in the forecheck. They finished checks. They were below the goal line. It was tough. And for John, not the greatest NHL debut, but also not the best spot for him to be in. I don't think that, if you had the choice, that the pairing that he would have been on would have been the same that, he was with. But at the end of the day, congratulations to Jock for getting that, chance to suit up an NHL sweater. That's still one game more than I have ever gotten. So congrats to him. But definitely think there's going to be, probably, let's just say Kalen Addison up. And that's no surprise that they made the switch there for someone that's a little bit more onto the skating side, a little bit more offensively driven as well.
Yeah, it was fun to see Jacob Benson, also former Huskies hockey forward. His Twitter profile or picture, I should say, had some Red River High School days way back in the day back there in Grand Forks. Some fun pictures there as well, too. Rem Pitlick is the other one that you were thinking of on that COVID protocol list as well. So if I can sit here in silence, which is very rare, I can at least do some work while I'm sitting here waiting. So I got that one up for you. The Minnesota Wild, kind of a topsy-turvy week for them. And I'm not sure. I mean, I think the COVID injury bug certainly doesn't help things, but it's been a weird week for Minnesota. And I think that one of the things that you have to pay attention to with this group as they move forward is kind of just, blocking out the surrounding noise a little bit. I think it's the first time in a while that we've heard around a Minnesota Wild team, the worries about Kirill Kaprizov, the worries about, the consistency piece. I think a couple of fans already starting to hit the panic button, and it's important to just kind of take a deep breath and take a reset here. I don't think that we're in the turmoil stage of the up and down swoons that we saw the Minnesota Wild teams of years past quite yet. I mean, I think they overexceeded expectations a little bit last year. This Minnesota group has a lot of capabilities. They have the pieces to, I don't want to say go deep, but they have the pieces to at least contend for a playoff spot, if anything. we're young. It's a young season. It's a group that's trying to figure out their way. You've got a lot of new pieces that have entered, a couple of pieces that left last year. You have the COVID injury bug on top of that. There's a lot of moving parts here. I think that we really get our first chance to accurately evaluate this team after maybe about game 16, 17, maybe even game 20, where you really get to look at the trends of this group so far and where they're going to shake out in the lineup. In my personal opinion, I think they're still an exciting team to watch. But like you mentioned, congratulations to John Lazat on his opportunity getting to the National Hockey League here, Nick. I do want to move over quickly to some women's hockey news. Women's hockey, like you mentioned, fought pretty valiantly on Friday night, clawing back to make that game a 1-goal hockey game halfway through. Just weren't able to eke out the win in that 5-2 loss. And then today, I mean, it was 2-1 after period number 1, and then it was just a difficult second period, and then a single goal in period number 3 for that 10-1 loss. The underlying statistics, kind of going back to what we saw in St. Cloud State teams, women's hockey teams of years past, the shot chart started to look a little lopsided for the first time this year, I would say. I mean, the Wisconsin series a little bit too, but you're playing a high caliber opponent. This Ohio State team, they're a good hockey team. They have a chance to really contend for a national championship this year. Nonetheless, Emma Paluzny has the serious potential to break that saves record for St. Cloud State women's hockey. She sits third all time on that list right now. Nick, this women's hockey group, a little bit of resiliency, not able to put together the full 60 minutes on Friday night. Steve McDonald echoed that sentiment. Not the showing that we had expected on Saturday. We talked about it with this group, that consistency of even if you lose a game on Friday, not to get your doors blown off on Saturday. What is the secret to going back to the drawing board for this group as they move on to Mankato next weekend?
I think you got to go between the ears, honestly. I don't think this is on the whiteboard for this group. I think this is the defining moment for this season right here, right now. I really do, Noah. First of all, you got to tip your cap to Ohio State. Like you mentioned, they're a good hockey team. And, unfortunately for the Huskies, Ohio State proved just how good they were. Now, for the women's team, we talk about this in sports a lot, and don't get me wrong, this is so much said easier than done. You have to have short-term memory. Mm-hmm. And more so, you have to have, sort of that consistent belief system, right? You have to be able to forget whether you win or you lose. And you always have to you can't waver the fact that you have to believe that you are a good player, you're on a good team, and you believe in the structure and the way you play. Mm-hmm. It's difficult, no question, after a result like it was here on Saturday. But this is the test for this squad. You can't let this hang over your heads. You have to understand that it was a tough weekend, fine, but learn from it and move on from it. I think this is, I guess the fear that I have, and I think in years past is, you sort of, look at the score, which again, tells you a little bit of what happened. Doesn't tell you everything, right? But it's easy to look at those surface numbers and go, we're so far away from being a good team. And you tend to sort of, kind of push yourself down your own rabbit hole per se, right? Yeah. You just can't do that, right? You have to, be able to look down, got to wipe the mud off the cleats or however you want to phrase it. And you got to look up and, that rearview mirror, smash it, break it. You got to continue to look forward. And again, it's not easy, but you got to refocus, you got to forget it. And you got to look forward to Mankato for a chance to, get back to a more positive outcome and a little bit more positive performance.
Yeah, I think the piece that you go back to is just establishing that forecheck a little bit too, and just feeling like you have a little bit more control over the game on both ends of the ice. As you know so well, Nick, as if you're an offensive player, especially, or you're a goal scorer, and it feels like you can't get out of your own zone, it feels like you're not even having the opportunity to try to create or generate on the opposite side of that center ice line. It not only is it a long night, it feels like a frustrating night too on top of that. And obviously giving up 10 goals, doesn't matter what league you're in, is a difficult proposition, but hopefully it adds some fuel to the fire. We've seen this Husky team in years past, when they do happen to have a stinker of a game, so to speak, on the scoreboard, they've responded very well, especially they get to come back at home. They get to play a team that they have the ability to not only handle, but it's also going to be a good measuring stick for where they are in the WCHA, pushing for that potentially number 4 spot in the standings there so far. I think is a good benchmark to kind of shoot for. This group, again, I think they're 2-5-2 or 2-5-1 is where they're at right now in the record. And they played two of the best teams, not only in the WCHA, but in all of the country in Wisconsin and Ohio State. So definitely a chance to kind of right the ship as far as the getting closer to 500 is concerned, but also, like you mentioned, that mental game between the ears. So best of luck to the Huskies women's hockey team. Excited to see them back on home ice. And the men's team back in action, NCHC hockey. Be there, watch it, figure it out. Follow some Huskies hockey. We'll have it all for you here, as always. Nick, we're going to turn over to that portion of the show that time. We're going to turn over to pretty much set the stage for our listeners. A really difficult week in professional hockey, in the hockey world in general. I think as we go back, trying to compile and take in all this information about the Chicago Blackhawks, about the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. Of course, we have the UHL fallout that's still kind of working itself out, as well as, of course, a piece coming out of Columbus that we're going to touch on as well. And kind of an interesting portion of this show. This is a lot of information for our listeners and our viewers to digest. So we want to make sure we get it accurate as we could. So we actually have put together a little segment together. Again, we remind you some viewer and listener discretion. The stories contain some pretty graphic depictions, some relating to sexual assault. So important to keep that in mind. And without further ado, we're going to kick it over to our recap of the last week in the world of hockey. We would like to remind you that these stories contain graphic depictions and accounts of sexual assault. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Before this week, Jalen Smerrick, the black hockey player who was racially taunted in the UHL, mutually terminated his contract with his team HC Donbass in mid-November. Yes, a player who was the victim of racial prejudice suffered more consequences than his attacker, who had a 13-game ban with the option to buy his way into shortening it into a 3-game ban. 6 days ago, the Chicago Blackhawks became the first team in NHL history to lose their first 6 games without leading at any point during their first 360-plus minutes of play in the regular season. In any other season, this would have been the dominating headline in Chicago. 4 days ago at Nationwide Arena in Ohio, Columbus netminder Elvis Merzlikins got his 4th start of the season and 4th win, standing tall by stopping 31 of 32 shots against the Dallas Stars. Hours earlier, his goalie mask shimmered with paintings of a close friend on the molded plastic as he walked down the tunnel on Monday, where a fan in a Dallas Stars jersey then taunted him about the death of fellow Latvia netminder and teammate Matīs Kivlenieks, who was inadvertently killed when a fireworks accident caused a mortar to explode in his chest. He was 24. Less than 12 hours later, Chicago's Stan Bowman stepped down as general manager of the Chicago Blackhawks, along with vice president of hockey operations Al McIsaac. To the non-adept hockey fan, many would believe that the move corresponded to the Hawks' abhorrent start to the season. But for those in the hockey world and the legal world, an independent investigation and subsequent report by Jenner and Block LLC prompted the move. Bowman also resigned as general manager of the 2022 U.S. Olympic men's hockey team. On Wednesday, hockey fans pieced through the findings of the Jenner and Block report. Brad Aldrich, a video coach in Chicago back in 2010, had just helped propel the team to their first Stanley Cup final since 1992, which they would win 17 days later. Days prior, an unnamed 20-year-old black ace was, quote, invited to Aldrich's apartment, who provided him with dinner and drinks, told him he had the power to get John Doe onto the Blackhawks roster, and turned on pornography. John Doe stated that Aldrich threatened John Doe by telling John Doe that he needed to act like he enjoyed the sexual encounter, or John Doe would never play in the NHL or walk again, forcibly performed oral sex on John Doe, masturbated on John Doe's back, and then threatened John Doe again before John Doe was able to escape Aldrich's apartment. The unnamed player then confided in another coach, who then reported the incident to proper executives. The team, including Stan Bowman, assistant executive Kevin Cheveldayoff, and its head coach John Quinville, responded by citing that the Stanley Cup final was more important than the issue, and the bad publicity and distraction would be too damaging for the team. As Aldrich in Chicago won the Stanley Cup and paraded less than 3 weeks later, the coach groped an intern before being released by the organization. Months later, he would be released by Miami, Ohio for an incident during a summer development camp with the team, and in 2013, Aldrich would serve 9 months in prison and 5 years of probation for sexually assaulting a 16-year-old at a Houghton, Michigan high school. Almost 11 years from the incident in 2010, John Doe became Kyle Beach. Kyle would later join reporter Rick Westhead this week on TSN, who provided one of the most incredibly heart-wrenching interviews in hockey history. Amidst this, the NHL fined Chicago $2 million for policy violations. Meanwhile, current Chicago captain Jonathan Toews said, quote, "To me, Stan Bowman and Al McIsaac, make any argument you want. They're not directly complicit in the activities that have happened, regardless of mistakes that may have been made. For someone like Stan, who has done so much for the Blackhawks, and Al as well, to lose everything they care about in their livelihoods, I have a lot of respect for them as people. They're good people," end quote. On Thursday, John Quenneville, who coached on Wednesday night for a red-hot Florida Panthers squad, resigned in the wake of the scandal. Just a day later, Kevin Cheveldayoff, now the general manager of the Winnipeg Jets since 2011, was exonerated of any wrongdoing by the league. Months prior, the NHL would not investigate the matter, and the Blackhawks called the claims made by Kyle Beach, quote, "meritless and baseless," end quote. In 2011, the NHL Players Association, led by Donald Fair, did not continue investigating the matter. Fair continues to lead the NHLPA as of this Sunday. Leading into the weekend, Chicago Blackhawks owner Rocky Wirtz, who had no knowledge of the issue back in 2010, requested that the Hockey Hall of Fame cross out Aldrich's name on the Stanley Cup with X's. Amidst the chaos, a formal federal lawsuit has now been filed in the case of Pittsburgh Penguins minor league affiliate in Wilkes-Barre-Scranton, alleging that former Wilkes-Barre-Scranton coach Clark Donatelli molested assistant coach Jared Scald's wife Erin during an outing on a road trip back in 2018. He allegedly made unwanted sexual advances, reached up her shirt and grabbed her breasts, and then later in the back of a car with her husband in the front seat, unaware of what was happening, reached down her pants and touched her vagina, despite her efforts to stop him. They also allege that current Minnesota Wild general manager Bill Guerin, who was general manager for Wilkes-Barre-Scranton and assistant GM for the Penguins at that time, asked Jared Scald to keep the reason for Donatelli's termination quiet, and that the team punished Scald for reporting the assault and later terminated his position under the guise of pandemic-related staff cuts. Guerin is also the assistant GM for the U.S. Olympic men's hockey team, the same team that Stan Bowman just resigned from. The lawsuit is still active, and a judge on September 30th denied the Penguins' motion for arbitration instead of a jury trial. Finally, this Saturday at noon, TSN's Rick Westhead tweeted a text from a longtime NHL executive that said, "I just don't understand how a little guy like Brad Aldrich can molest a 6'4" NHL player." So Nick, obviously, it's been a difficult week in the world of hockey. We talked a little bit about the situation in Columbus. We talked a little bit about the fallout of the UHL. We talked a little bit about the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Penguins. I think the appropriate place that we should start, though, Nick, is the big one that's been on everybody's minds, and that's been the Chicago Blackhawks, their investigation. As we kind of mentioned, some of the highlights, if you will, from that Jenner and Block report. Again, that 107-page report is available for download. I actually downloaded it myself. That's where I got some of the quotes. If anything, Nick, I would say our listeners and viewers would be well served paging through various portions of that. There's some really good information to follow, and they did a fantastic job with their investigation. Nick, your first initial thoughts on the discussion of the Chicago Blackhawks?
Well, first, let's rewind the clocks a little bit. And not 11 years ago, but even about 12 months ago, when this story really first started to become public, right? I think what's important to just set the tone and for this was some information started to come out about it. Again, you know, when these sort of stories break through, right, there's always a bit of hesitation in terms of, you know, the details, in terms of the credibility of said information, where it's coming from, who's making these claims, that sort of thing. And it's not about, you know, going back in hindsight and what, you know, now versus then. It's, you know, these are very serious matters, right? But more so, how does one digest as a person and more importantly, or an organization, when some of this information does make its way in the public eye, and how they respond to it? Well, let's not forget that both Joel Quenneville and others, both players, current and former, on the Blackhawks, were asked about some of this information, and they denied knowing about it. The Blackhawks also pretty much put it to the side burner, claiming they didn't know much about it. Part of the reason why we're encouraging our listeners and our viewers to go actually into the Jenner and Block report is what's so damning about this report is it completely contradicts the stance
Yes.
of the organization and some of the players that had made public statements when this first started to emerge, right? And that's important. The reason why I'm going back is that's important. That shows you, because you can make a connection that says the organization themselves didn't either A, make it a priority, 2, wanted to bury it, or 3, a combination of both. More importantly, what does this do for the victim who now has named himself as Kyle Beach? I should say one of the victims, there's more than one here, who stepped forward in a very incredibly brave interview with Rick Westhead. Again, I cannot give more credit to Rick Westhead of TSN, who's been spearheading this from day one, who's been really, really good at not only reporting what he can validate, because he's talked to so many people, but then after this report was published, Noah, going back and essentially everything that has come out from him has been pretty much verified and validated. So a couple of things that stick out to me. One, the folks that made public statements, again, about going back a year, that said they had never heard about it or this meeting never took place. Well, guess what? It was made very, very clear that a meeting took place. And again, the sentiment and what drives and should drive everybody nuts is right before the Stanley Cup final and the organization. Now you can make it as organization as Chicago Blackhawks. You can make it as upper management. I don't really care what you make it as, but the folks in positions of power made the decision that winning the Stanley Cup was more important than taking care of an issue that was so important that was laid out right in front of them. And they thought that if we go wait for 3 weeks, then we can deal with it then. We obviously know that that's not how these things are supposed to be handled. And even more so, the worst part of all this, Noah, is not only it's how also when it was handled by Chicago, there was a mutual separation of, mind you, legally, in contractual terms. I want people to understand this. That's usually how these things go. It's not because they don't want to get fired and, part-time work and, workman's comp. It has nothing to do with that. But mostly because none of this was really taken care of. The perpetrator goes on to violate and do this multiple more times at different organizations. So, I guess
including the Chicago Blackhawks organization to an intern weeks later,
and then to an underage person, again, Miami of Ohio, Houghton, Michigan, as we described before. And I'll leave my initial thoughts of this final thing here, Noah, and that is, I guess when I was younger, you're sort of taught that every action that you do or everything you say has consequences beyond yourself. There's a ripple effect, right? That's both the same way with not doing something or not taking the appropriate action, right? And in this case, what Brad Aldrich has done to multiple people is cause them life-lasting memories and situations they were brought into that nobody have asked for and you can't really erase. You just can't take that away. And it's something that they're stuck with for the rest of their lives. And I think the last part about it is many of those, had this been taken care of in the proper way, would have been possibly prevented. We can't obviously say everything could have been prevented. If somebody's out there to do something, they do it. There's granted so many measures of protections in place for people, especially at work or at home. You kind of wish that, this would never happen, but I would like to think that some of these instances, especially within the same organization, definitely would have probably been prevented. And therefore the damage this person would have been less. Because obviously if it should have been zero, don't get me wrong. But at the end of it, if it happens once, you better make sure that it doesn't happen again, especially if it's someone that is in your own organization.
The difficult piece about this too is really it goes back and it stems from when you have junior hockey in Canada, when you have Hockey Canada, when you have USA Hockey, the development camps, the development programs, and then you have things designed that are supposed to mitigate this, like Safe Sport. You go back to the Chico Andredes scandal that you have with that piece. You go back to Sheldon Kennedy, right? You go back to Theo Fleury. These are players that at the time when they came out with their stories were, I don't want to say thought as outliers, but they were this separate portion, this new piece of information that it felt like, oh, this was a sporadic piece, that you had one or two coaches within the junior ranks that were causing issues. And as we go on, even not only within the game of hockey, but in the world of sports in general, as Larry Nassar, the USA Gymnastics piece, what do you tell your children? What do you tell your 6-year-old, your 8-year-old who wants to get into the game of hockey, wants to go to a USA Hockey development camp? Don't forget, Aldrich was working in women's hockey for USA Hockey just mere months after he was terminated in his contract from the Chicago Blackhawks. What do you tell somebody who wants to play major junior in Canada and is working their way up to it, and understanding that there is a risk for things like this to happen? Because one of the things that stuck out to me, Nick, Rick Westhead, again, his tweet today, how a longtime NHL executive said to him, quote, "I just don't understand how a little guy like Brad can molest a 6'4" NHL player," and talking about the process of grooming. And then you listen to Jonathan Taves' comments and Patrick Kane to a lesser extent, and you listen to how they somewhat absolve a lot of what Stan Bowman did and the executive department did. This is an issue that goes beyond just a single coach or a handful of bad coaches. This is an issue that stems in some respects directly from Gary Bettman to Donald Fear to every executive in the NHL, to every player in the NHL. You listen to Kyle Beach's discussions about how things were said about him in the locker room, yet the players deny that either they didn't know it or they knew it way long after the fact, when Kyle Beach, the man who went through this, totally contradicts that statement, along with the support of players like Brent Sopel and a lot of other players that have validated that information as well too. It's damning enough to have something like this happen. But not only in the game of hockey, but in a lot of sports, as we continue to sit with the good old boys club and sweep issues like this under the rug, at what point does the dam and the levee start to break, Nick? I mean, that's my honest question. At what point do we stop sitting here? And even, again, we don't know what the Wilkes-Barre Scranton piece is. Bill Guerin a part of those pieces? We have no idea one way or the other, I suppose. At what point do we even stop these issues from happening or stop them from going any further? At what point do we make that change? Because, Nick, we've been doing this show for almost 22 months, and this has got to be maybe the 6th or 7th discussion we've had of sexual assault, of groping, of things like of that nature. And we keep having the same discussion. When does it change? How does it change?
Well, first of all, $2 million fines in the NHL does not make that change. You know, and
a friend pointed out to me, and granted, I understand the fines related to a collective bargaining agreement and policy and that sort of thing. If I'm not mistaken, and quote me if I'm wrong, the New Jersey Devils were fined $3 million for their handling of the Ilya Kovalchuk issue. An issue of a contract is fined more than a case of sexual assault, and a settlement has not been reached with anybody on top of this.
Right. I was actually just going to point out that, in terms of the contrast. Now, I want to be careful here because I know people like to, look at oranges and what they think are oranges because it's a fine from the NHL, right? The reality is I don't like those comparisons for 2 reasons. One, again, circumventing, those sort of contracts, and we're going to go to the Arizona Coyotes who were fined and lost draft picks because essentially the league, in a similar way, it's taken the same stance as what the Chicago Blackhawks did. I don't want anything to interrupt. Those two things, we're going to give those teams a competitive edge in the hockey world. So get that out of your mind, get that out of comparisons. You have the NHL fine.
Yeah. Is it fair? You mentioned the Arizona Coyotes, and I just cut you off again. I'm sorry. Is it fair to make a closer comparison then to the Mitchell Miller situation and the way that was handled?
A little bit, just because, again, the NHL, I mean, you're talking about swinging and missing. The NHL need to go up to the freaking batter's box, in my opinion, And so the way I look at it is this: the NHL, who prides itself in trying to be, this hockey's for everyone, and they're trying to be more incorporating, and again, trying to rid the image. That's all PR BS to me. I'm sorry, especially when you handle the situation with a fine and that's it. Where was the $2 million fine? And then, hey, how about every single person in the league has to go through safe sport training, or has to do some sort of sensibility training, or require everybody that's in direct team, like player involving roles, like a trainer or a doctor, go through training where if you're, in, or, or if you're involved in witness sexual, so how it gets reported, where you almost do something where, like the voting's like, it's got to be a standardized operation, and you just force it to happen. They missed this really bad.
Yes.
Because the fine's one thing, but really it's nothing.
Yeah. Not only did they miss this, Nick, the National Hockey League 11 years ago too, the NHL Players Association, the Chicago Blackhawks, not only did they miss this, they were actively against opening an investigation. And that's the piece that, again, how do you look at not only an NHL player, but anyone's son or daughter and say, here's a sport that you can play. Oh, but by the way, if something happens to you, keep your mouth shut about it because no one's going to help you.
Well, more, and that's the bigger damning part is, the Players Association is supposed to be there for the players. And for them to take the sort of position that, I don't want to open this door, it shows you that the Good Boys Club, as we're so actively calling it, was completely in control of that, right? So it's can you imagine? I mean, there's no way we can put ourselves into Kyle Beach's shoes, but just imagine this sort of things happen to, not only do people in your own organization are making fun of you, they're telling you to be quiet, or essentially the amount of years, the practices, the pucks you shot, the games you played, all the effort and the sacrifices not only you made, your parents made, maybe even your teammates, driving you back and forth to hockey games and practices and weekend tournaments, right? All that could be going out the window because of something that you were forced on you. Yeah. I just can't fathom that. And then on top of that, you're supposed to have this resource that says, this is for me as a player, if something happens. And they're going, basically shut the hell up. And then the league is going, call me again on Tuesday. It's Tuesday. I'm basically, call me Thursday. Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry, I forgot I had a meeting. Can we go back this, a week from now? Because I got next week really busy. Just really not trying to essentially just work through it. And if there's any one thing I will say to our listeners, right? And I think this is the call to action, that if anything that plays to this is, if you see anything, whether it's, at home, at work, talk about it and deal with it right away. And that goes to both sides, right? If I'm in a position of management, at my place of business and something's brought out to me, again, if this doesn't show you, it looks so much worse by you just not addressing it and going through the proper channels, then trying to, and I get it. I've dealt, I'll put it this way. I was involved in a situation where I became aware of information. And I would to say this, I followed my protocols, and, it kept me out of the harm's way, in terms of being a person that was bearing the information because I reported to the proper channels and it was properly dealt with, right? Whereas when you don't do this, again, it goes back to the victim, right? You have to have, for everybody. And, you asked me the question, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping over the page here. Yep. But when you ask your son or daughter, not just in hockey, but in life, right? You don't want them to walk around in fear with everything they do. Mm-hmm. You have to, and for more part, how does your son or your daughter, not, whether that's 6, 3 years old, because when you watch your kids grow, right? You're like, I want the world to be around that's safe. I can't protect them from everything, but something does happen. There's got to be repercussions for the people that impose harm, right? What does this whole story say from why the Blackhawks handle this to how they care about the community, how they care about people in general, and especially victims of said violence? It says that they don't give two rat's asses, pardon my French, about anybody. And if you have kids at home and whatnot, and this is acceptable to you, and more importantly, do you feel comfortable whether today go to work or what, and what does this tell them, how it was handled? Hey, guess what? This will happen to you, and guess what? A, your story may never make it out. 2, the people who did this to you are never going to face repercussions. And 3, you're going to be holding this cloud over your head essentially the rest of your life. This is not the way our society, needs to handle these types of situations.
Yeah. And you're going to be labeled as the bad guy. And think about that piece of what it takes to come forward as a victim with that information, or be an advocate for a victim and come forward with that information. They're difficult discussions to have. Nick, my kind of closing thoughts here. I thought it was intriguing. I read a couple of articles, of course, in The Athletic, but talking about essentially the interview with TSN's Rick Westhead that Kyle Beach, who so eloquently did that. I mean, an incredible 25 and a half minutes. If you get a chance to listen to it, definitely, I would say grab a couple of tissues and definitely sit in a quiet space and watch. I mean, I had to pause it a couple of times. I mean, it was something else. But it's interesting how the writer from The Athletic noted that the only person and one of the few people to apologize right away was Kyle Beach himself. The victim is the one who's apologizing in this piece. And the moment in the interview where he is asked about what he would say to the Houghton, Michigan victim who was 16 years old, and his response, it makes you really want to reach through the screen and hug him and punch everybody who has ever been wrong to Kyle Beach. It's unbelievable to watch somebody go through that, and not only to have somebody go through that and show that genuineness, and to have an entire organization, an entire players association, and an entire league turn their back on him for something that he's carried with him for the last 11 years. So I think one of the things I'd like to say, and it's been said plenty of times, but I mean, I commend Kyle Beach for what he's done. It takes an incredible step, not only to come forward with what he has, but to persevere through all the doubt and the negativity that has surrounded what people call his accusations and allegations, and called them false, meritless, baseless, and to be able to persevere for not only himself, but for people in that similar situation. And in truth, the game of hockey and everyone around him trying to make this sport in our world a better place. It's such a commendable action after such an unspeakable tragedy. Nick, the other piece that I want to bring in this, we mentioned a little bit about the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. We mentioned even the little piece about Jalen Smerrick leaving his own team, even though he was the victim of racial taunts, if you will. Even talking about Elvis Merzlikins and, teaching people not to be that Dallas Stars fan that makes a comment like that when he's coming out for a hockey game on a Monday night. Nick, that's my closing thought. What is your closing thought? Again, to telling people to be better in areas more than just sexual assault, not being that Dallas Stars fan that makes those comments, being better in the minor league level where a lot of things probably go under the wayside even more so, or even in leagues like the UHL where things might not be policed as such, and just being better as a person in your own community.
Well, I want to go back just a little bit. First of all, when the Blackhawks hired Jenner and Block for this investigation, now mind you, the organization themselves hiring this, initially my thoughts were, this can't really, are we really going to find out the truth about this, right? I really do have to commend the job that Jenner and Block did on this. Could you imagine being that law firm? Mind you, I know that they're a very big, powerful law firm in Chicago, but having, before this was all released, because that there was a meeting before all this released, and there it is, the full report, right? I imagine going to the Wirtzes, who, mind you, in that same report were cleared of wrongdoing. Kevin Cheveldayoff, I know you could say he was cleared by the commissioner, although I know many folks have their opinions about that. Joel Quenneville was not, very much so not. And after his conversation with Gary Bettman, he also resigned as his head coach. And, I'm glad and I'm very happy about the job that law firm did to get to the bottom of it, to interview over 130 people, to put this whole story together and to give the proper victims in this case their day of justice. Even though there really isn't a justice in the courtroom, there is the people's court too, right? As they talk about in society where, again, when these stories first come out, there's always this, backlash of, is this really true? Is this, money hungry? Is this a failed NHL player just trying to get his day? And obviously with this investigation, not the case at all. Everything that has come forward from the victim side has been properly validated.
And carrying that against not only a big organization like the Chicago Blackhawks, but think about what it was like to be Kyle Beach, where you fought so long for an investigation. You get one, but it's an independent investigation hired by the Chicago Blackhawks, and you're sitting on pins and needles waiting. Are they going to be the law firm that says what was said, or will they take the side of the Chicago Blackhawks?
Right. So, I mean, that's yeah, that's a hell of a job. That's a hell of a position for that law firm to be in. And I'm glad that, it sounds like they were free and able to do this completely independently, to really get to the bottom of the truth. And again, the truth sometimes is hard, Noah. It can be really, really difficult. And but it's what we do with it, right? And I think as far as my closing thoughts, you mentioned again, Merzlikins, you mentioned, some other, the UHL situation. I know we briefly discussed others, but, it's not that the story or now the details come to life. It's now that we know how these things are happening, how they're being improperly dealt with. It's now our turn as a society to take a learning lesson from this and impose change. And again, as you mentioned very eloquently, sports in general, not just the NHL, but I think the sports landscape. I think that, in terms of society, we have to be more on the supportive and encouraging side when it comes to victims advocation. And more so, just as a human being, when these things come out, we have to not be afraid to dig into these and to find the truth. Now, it begs me to say this because I know there's going to be some folks that will pop up and say, but not every story that comes out is, ends up being true. That's fine. That may happen, but it's less than 1% of these cases, number one. But number two, the bigger thing about this story is there wasn't even an attempt to validate
right
or even look into what had come out, right? That's the thing is we need a society that says this is a very serious allegation. We need to look into this and we need to figure out what's true and what's not. And so I don't want to commend the Chicago Blackhawks for but I do have to say for them, I can only imagine that, this was a day of reckoning. And, this is a very nasty wake-up call. And, more so, I hope that this example from this team has more than just a ripple effect in terms of the news, but also around the league. I hope it forces and induces change at the NHL level, at the master control at the NHL Players Association. And granted, that statement by Donald Fair, put it in a paper ball, throw it in the fire pit, light that bitch on fire. That was awful. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, it was. He was one of the few people that say sorry, but 11 years later, and unless this comes out, he's not saying sorry at all. So I really can't say much to that. And then to close it all off, again, I just think that, at least for me, as a person looking at this, it's hard, honestly. It's really hard because, as you mentioned, Kyle Beach's comments, and I've had an opportunity to watch the interview a couple of times. There's things that in when you hear that, you just leave you lost for words. And let's work on ourselves. Let's work as a group, as human beings in the community and in society and in this country, both U.S. and Canada, to put a stop to this. There's an easy way to do it. That's just doing the right thing and being a good person. It's really all it comes down to.
Yeah, you talk about Donald Fair's comments. I thought Stan Bowman's comments were not so great either. And Al McIsaac didn't even make a statement, that's telling of a lot of things. And you mentioned, it's not often that us as broadcasters are at a loss for words. And this was one of those moments that I think was there. And you mentioned you hope that this will change things. This has to change things. This has to be one of those moments, those milestone moments that have to change things for the better and make things more inclusive and really get hockey back to the way that we know it can be. There's so many great things about this game. There's so many awesome things that we see and do and allow people to play, and where we come from, we have taken a lot of steps, but things like this pull us back to where we were and we don't want to be. And like you mentioned, for all the people involved, especially like you mentioned, Jenner and Block, the ability that they have, and in some ways the Chicago Blackhawks for willing to at least opening this up and creating a better National Hockey League and better game of hockey. There are some good things that will come out of this, but right now we are in that stage where it's a painful moment. It's a painful moment for a lot of us watching. So Nick, I appreciate the discussion and having it with you. It's not an easy discussion. I appreciate our listeners for being able to listen through or watch through, because it's a discussion that had to be had, but It's not easy, as we've mentioned. But speaking of things that are easy peasy lemon squeezy and hanging out, we're going to head on to our extra ice session a little bit later than usual. We're going to talk about some Halloween fun, some shenanigans, some movies and such. So without further ado, let's head on over. Episode number 85, the extra ice segment. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. Nick, we've had a lot of fun on this show. I was thinking back to what we did for Halloween last year. We had a little bit of our favorite candies, favorite movies, things like that. Before we get into our segment, I thought, first of all, let's take a look at this date in NHL history, shall we? October 31st. What has happened around the hockey world? 1981, throwing it back to right before you were born, crazy enough. I had to throw at least one of those in there, of course. The great one, Wayne Gretzky, became the first player in NHL history to have 7 hat tricks before his 21st birthday. Apparently, his career ended up being all right, from what I remember. Also does a fantastic job. Him and Paul Bissonnette, I would say, is it TNT that they're on?
Yeah.
It's been a hoot. If you haven't gotten a chance to check out some of those games, a lot of fun. Speaking of another great, back in 1942, Maurice Richard playing in his first ever NHL game on Halloween for the Montreal Canadiens, wearing number 15 at the time before switching to number 9 later. He was first dubbed the Comet before he was the Rocket. Got his first NHL point, which was an assist, 36 seconds into his first NHL game, a 3-2 win against the Boston Bruins at the Forum. A couple more dates, 2 more here for you, Nick. The New York Rangers, they had forward Marcel Dion scoring his 700th goal of his NHL career back in 1987. And in 2003, the Vancouver Canucks, they became the second team in NHL history to score the first goal in each of their first 11 games of the season. So kind of an interesting milestone there. It was a 4-1 road win against the Phoenix Coyotes at that time. Last tidbit here before I bring you in here, Mr. Nick Maxon. What 2 NHL players have a birthday tomorrow on Halloween that are active right now? Nick Foligno, Evgeny Svechnikov, respectively. So congratulations, happy birthday. I should say tomorrow, but technically it's today if you're listening. But nonetheless, Mr. Maxon, I think we should head over to 10 questions. What do you think?
Well, actually 5 questions, but 5 sounds like more than 4. So at the end of the day, yeah, only 5 questions.
Yeah.
I'll kind of let you bring into this one because, you know, like you mentioned, we had some fun discussions last year, but a little bit different this year, and a little bit more, what do you call it? Philosophical, maybe would be the right word. Yeah.
Introspective.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if our brains are that powerful. I don't know.
Well, speaking of introspective, Nick, I've got my questions in a list, but kind of when we talked about a little bit pre-show that I was shocked, I think the listeners might be surprised. The question at its base says, do you scare easily, Mr. Maxon? And I was under the impression, I guess I had the thought that you were more fearful of the psychological thriller. And from what you've told me, you scare easily, but not psychologically.
No, it's more not easily. If you catch me off guard, that's pretty much the only way you do it.
So hit him with that Val's order tab, Caleb. You'll get him. Pretty
much, yeah. But, you know, when I go to a scary movie, you know, it's, first of all, I have a hard time not picking apart the terrible plot lines and how, you know, these grown adults make some very unadult decisions in times of panic and danger. So it actually drives me nuts. You know, with that being said, though, yeah, I don't really scare easily in terms of the philosophical, the introspective stuff. I've seen enough. I mean, if you look at my face half the time, dude, nothing can out scare you from there. But seriously, and, you know, it's hard, honestly, because I think you know, when I think of a scary movie, you want to leave the movie theater as, I don't want to go home because that thing I just saw on screen, it was to say it's some monster or whatever the heck it is, or some ghoul, or
anytime you see a balloon after watching the movie,
right. And it's like that thing hides under beds. I am sleeping on the couch today, and I'm going to have every single light on the full blast because screw that. I do not want to have the thing come in, you know, tear me inside my own mattress. No.
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's hard nowadays. Now, we talked about this pre-show, Noah, but we talked about Cabin in the Woods and how it was a very traditional sort of scary movie. Then all of a sudden, the last, maybe 15 minutes, it kind of took an incredible plot twist. And I left the movie theater actually angry. I left it angry and confused because on one side of me, I was like, oh, it's somebody trying something new. But it was more so like, it wasn't scary. It's more like they fell into the matrix for 10, 15 seconds and left to go, what the F was that all about? Like, kind of confused, and just, I don't think there's just enough there to really tie the first, hour and 15 minutes movie, the last 15, 10. It was just very, very bizarre, but kind of like Saw was back in the day.
Yeah.
Although I think Saw was much more successful. It's because of how the writing was done. It's just something different. I know in scary movies, there's not too many different plot lines you can throw into scary movies. So yeah, I don't know. It's got to be something where you got to catch me off guard. What about you? I'm curious as to Mr. Noah Grant.
I was about to ask, if you had to guess, do I scare easily?
I would say no.
You'd be wrong.
I would say no.
You'd be wrong. I scare pretty easily, actually, and not in the sense that like, I think as a kid, obviously it was a little bit different. I scare in the sense that like I live alone, so I'm kind of one of those people that I'll watch the scary movie, I'll hang into it, I'll enjoy it, but then when I go to bed at night, I'm like, not a fan. And it depends on what it is. Psychological thrillers, I think things like Gone Girl, I think as a male especially, kind of freak me out. That's not a scary movie per se, but it's more psychological. I tell you what, I watched a movie once, and I don't know why I found it so creepy, but it was a movie about the Babadook. And it was things like that kind of get my heebie-jeebies up a little bit. And I know that they're not real per se, but things are like watching things about like not so much urban legends, but like folklore, like things that go back to like cultural, traditional, like Native American history, things like that. Those things kind of get me on edge a little bit more. And especially, when you're sleeping in a dark apartment by yourself, I think that's when I start to scare easily, is that I don't know that it freaks me out so much on screen per se. It's in my own head afterwards of what I've seen on screen, if that makes sense. So yes and no, but yes, I would say, I think it's fair to say that I scare easily. Nick, kind of along that line though, we got kind of a 1-2 punch here. First of all, what monster or scary thing kind of creeps you out the most? Before we talk about what makes a scary movie scary, it doesn't have to, it can be anything. My choice is probably going to be something kind of off the wall, I would say. But is there something that, you think about, a balloon from the movie It or something that kind of creeps you out every time you see it?
That's a great question because, you talk about balloons, or you talk about, like when they do like a close-up shot of a machete, because you kind of, it's the symbolism piece, right? Yeah. I don't know if, I don't know if there's really any like sort of symbolistic things that kind of creep me out, because at least the movies that I've seen, and I've seen my fair share. I don't know if at least now it has the same effect as it used to. I would say if there's anything, it's more the sensory type thing. So for example, like, yes. It's that walking through, in a scene movie, and all of a sudden, like you have, like that can that falls down. It's always like some Campbell soup can or something like that. It falls, that randomly a large gust of wind only in the kitchen puts that off of the counter onto the ground, or like door creaking. It's kind of like that crap. There's a plot twist coming, or something that's different, right? The impending doom. Yeah. So I think it's those kind of things, or like. And of course, they always, hey, the power randomly goes out. And of course, it's one house on the freaking block that it happens. So it's not just the whole city, right? Or a generator that starts up, or a chainsaw. It's like, what in the hell? So, I think it's those things where it's sort of those sensory things that get me. And again, it kind of goes into that, sort of unexpected things where, it kind of is in the movie sense, but in terms of actual practical reality things, it's those things are the one that creep me out the most, because it's like, okay, what was that? Because you just don't know what that actually means. Whereas I think they go back to the balloon, you go back to again the mask from Michael Myers, like exactly what that is. So it's like, okay, the guy had a bad face job, big deal.
But yeah, so, and that's fair. I think that because those go back to the real perceptions of how we perceive the world. And you talk about how do you draw the line between the supernatural or the creepy versus the realism of making it stick. The monster scary thing that creeps me out the most is actually the Momo doll. I don't know if you remember those. those things from those, the faces, not a fan. So please don't send me those on Twitter or anything. Caleb, I'm on to you. I will hurt you. I can see you doing that already. Anyway, but I think it goes back to the second question that I had. And you talked about the sensory piece. What makes a scary movie scary? What are the other pieces of the sensory that I wanted to go back to? And I actually saw it actually in my clinicals and seeing particular things, particular, actions during a surgery or that sort of thing. The sensory piece where, similar to when you watch a hockey player get hit in an awkward way, we have this ability to feel somebody else's pain or perceive what that might, things that make you cringe when you just watch them because you're like, oh, that wasn't even me and I still felt that. Things where, I've seen movies where like someone drills into the top of somebody's hand that's been essentially held down at a table, or they have this little drill that goes right inside, the cranium, and they drill in. Things like that kind of get you on edge. I don't know if that makes a scary movie, but I think, particular torture scenes, if you will, I think, kind of Saw-esque, but not over the top, just enough to where it's like, you can see that being a realistic thing that somebody could do to somebody. But in your opinion, what makes the movie scary?
I think there has to be, and this is the hard part, right? Because for scary movies, there's two ways you can go, but there's the realistic and then there's the paranormal, I think, / unrealistic. To give you some examples, like realistic Saw, I could actually see if they had the tools at their disposal and everything, that's kind of stuff that could actually happen, right? Now, again, some of, the way they deal with that, again, goes back to the Darwin moments of human capabilities, but the creepy thing is, you got guys that are handcuffed to the first one, right, where they're handcuffed to pipes, and you don't have really a way to get out, and making the decision, right, of having to saw off your own ankle, it's to try to get out, kind of things. I think that's the part that scares, where it's like, because I think, at least for me, as a problem solver, right, you're in a situation where, there's only one way out of this. It's got to be done this way. Oh God! Like,
have you ever seen the movie Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman?
I don't.
Kind of an older movie, and it actually has Kevin Spacey in it too. But I think
would be good, yeah.
From what you've described, I think if you haven't seen that movie, I think check that one out. Maybe you'll think it's dumb. I found that one to be obviously a good plot twist at the end, but I found that one to be a little bit of a mixture of the psychological versus what you're saying, where the victims had to deal with something like that. So just something to pause it there. But anyway, is there anything else that makes a scary movie, in your opinion, scary?
It's got to be unpredictable. That's the big thing. There's so many movies that are out there that you can literally go, yep, and then you see like the foreshadowing in just a cinematography, right, where it's like, yep, the girl's laying down, she looks back, she sees that coming, and she's got two doors, one that everybody's yelling at her to go for, and she goes, no, I'm gonna take the one that everybody knows if I go through that one, it's gonna be like an Iron Maiden chest, I'm about to get squashed and have metal pegs again, I'm gonna be dead in an instant. So it's just, it's and again, it's hard. It's hard to do that sometimes in plot points. So I think, for me, if you can keep it, the audience off edge and not really, use, those elements of film and even writing to say where it's foreshadowing, you can really kind of just almost see things happen before they do. The unpredictability has to be in the writing too, not just, again, the sensory, the special effects, the audio, the video. You have to have a plot line that also steers away the audience as well.
Yeah, you had kind of talked a little bit about that piece too, about the unpredictability and kind of the meeting of human fate, where you only have one option or one way out. There's a movie on Netflix, and I'm trying to see if I can figure out what it's called, but essentially in the movie, and it's more of an action movie, but I think it's just called The Old Guard. That's what it's called. And there's a scene in the movie where essentially it's this group of people that they're immortal for so long, and they stay alive for however immortal they are until their body starts to finally fail them. So it could be thousands of years, whatever it is. But their goal is to kind of like keep guard of the rest of society by being this immortal, person. And one of the immortals gets put in this kind of like iron casket. And what happens is when they die, they regenerate and they wake up kind of in the similar spot that they died, if you will. But what had happened was one of the women was found to be a witch that was one of these immortals, and they were put in this casket and dropped in the ocean. So what happens is she had drowned. she dies and she wakes up and she continues to drown again. And she repeats the cycle because she can't ever get out of the cycle. And that's kind of what it makes me think of there, where it's like your options, if you're going to die, you want a way out. You want a way to be able to control that, I guess, a little bit. So that kind of goes back to that piece too. Nick, I kind of wanted to, we got two more questions here that I had. This one's more of a simpler one. And I think I know your answer to this one. Are you convinced in real life that ghosts and the supernatural exist? Do they exist? Not for you? No, I think that they do. Are you an alien believer too, or not really?
I will use the same response as Neil deGrasse Tyson does. I don't think we know the answer to that yet. And
can I use that for the podcast from here on out for everything you ask me?
Yeah, I can't stop you, so let's put it that way. But when we think of the word aliens, we often attribute that to a human-like form that's got eyes, it's got ears, there's a way of communication. They've got two arms and two legs. Define alien, right? Alien bacteria. I mean, I do think that. No, but seriously, I mean, so you talk about the philosophical things, and I'm going to close with this. I think somewhere out there are intelligent life forms. I don't think, however, they're anywhere close to us, and I think it's going to be either something we discover or something where we're going to kill the human race off before then, because of so many things we're killing ourselves with that we'll never be able to discover that part of the universe. So.
All right. Fair. My final question for you, Mr. Maxson, as we end the show, feel free to interpret this one as you want. Do you believe in any conspiracy theories? And if so, which is the one that you believe that is most convincing?
So conspiracy theories, are we talking around like Halloween kind of thing, or
in general? Yeah.
Rarely, honestly, conspiracies are that because people conspire. They don't know what the hell they're talking about, and they make assumed judgments based on limited information. So not really, honestly.
Wow. Can we quote that one? Wow. That was, just set that one in its place and hammer that peg home.
pretty much. I do think there's something with Area 51. However, okay. I'm also not convinced that isn't it just a giant smoke screen.
Okay.
Because we'll think of it this way: the U.S. military, they're so good about safeguarding stuff. Why? And again, there's this giant thing that it's almost. I almost think we've almost fueled the smoke screen ourselves too, where there's this huge thing, and there's been so many people interviewed, you can't talk about it. But then again, I don't know. I think there's more to the UFO thing than I think that is being made public. But that to me isn't a conspiracy theory. I think that's just more
panic control almost.
I think so. And I think, I think that's more just, controlling of the masses. And, I don't know. I think it's happened enough where obviously the U.S. government / military, they know about it. I think they don't know enough about it where they know if they went up and spoke about it, they wouldn't have answers. And more so, again, as you mentioned, if you open up that door never shuts. So I think that there's something to that. However, what they know and what they claim to know, that's still yet to be out there. But again, that to me is not really a conspiracy theory because there's video evidence of it, both from military planes, from civilian cameras, about behaviors and different things that are happening. So I'm curious about that, but again, I don't really think that falls in line with what you claim. So I'll throw it back at you. What about you? Do you believe in any, and if so, why?
Hey, is the ill-advised shot a conspiracy theory? It feels like one.
I will defer to Brett Larson on that.
I'm on to you, Mr. Larson. I don't know that I believe in one, but I've heard of, I would say only one that I don't know that I believe it, but I found it to be plausible at best, if that makes sense.
Sure.
It involves the JFK assassination, and no, it's not the second shooter on the grassy knoll. So shut up.
That's not happening. No.
Yeah. The only interesting one that I've heard is that Lee Harvey Oswald fires the initial shot and misses, right? But they always talk about the angle of entry in which the bullets are. The conspiracy theory is that after that initial shot, the Secret Service agents, who granted had rifles, right, that were there, that are on the back of the motorcade, the Secret Service agent hears the first shot, raises his rifle in anticipation to bring it up towards the front of the motorcade where President JFK is, and then bring it around to where he's trying to figure out where the shooter is, and accidentally discharges his weapon into the presidential vehicle, striking occupants with the vehicle. I don't believe it, but I at least find it somewhat plausible. The only thing that contradicts that for me is the fact that if something like that happened, would it not be easily explained within a Secret Service, FBI, or some sort of report, the Warren report that would come out about that? Now, no. I can see the U.S. government covering that sort of information up and blaming it on the deranged Russian shooter, or Russian conspiracy American shooter that is Lee Harvey Oswald, who forever will be unbeknownst to his motives because of thank you, Jack Ruby, you crazy son of a bitch. But that's the only one that I've heard that I'm kind of like, you know what, if I found a little bit more evidence, I could buy that ever so slightly, and see enough information to where the U.S. government maybe keeps that one under wraps. And with Jack Ruby, we'll never know. Now, was Jack Ruby a conspirator? I don't think so. I don't buy those ones either. I think Jack Ruby was just a freaking idiot looking for his own fame, thinking he was helping the American people and essentially screwing out that process. In all actuality, Nick, is there any merit to this conspiracy theory? Or do you think it's a little far-fetched?
I think it's far-fetched because if it's all you had to do, if it really was that, all you do is claim it was an accident, blame the gun or blame the person. Yeah. So the question I would have of what's the motive to cover that up?
Now, my question is, because remember, you have more than one shot. Lee Harvey Oswald still could have fired into the presidential motorcade again, but where it's easier to lay blame and let people believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the shooter. But again, why don't you define it as such? Now, I believe it's the Warren Report is what it's called, defines that says that Lee Harvey Oswald is the best known representation of who the shooter was. Maybe the U.S. government, maybe something like this did happen with an accidental discharge, but it's easier to say, well, we have a guy who did shoot into the presidential motorcade. He did it, right? So that's the only one where.
Here's the funny thing. So first of all, the original weapon is still in the warehouse. Also, there's multiple weapons that the Secret Service would have. All you have to do in today's days is do a ballistics test.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Because, at the end of the day, were they the same caliber?
I'm guessing not, because if you have a rifle that's a sniper rifle versus, more of a handheld kind of in between rifle, I would imagine they're different. But again, that's where it goes back to, people ask the question all the time, how much do you trust the U.S. government in their handling of the situation? What facts do they feel pertinent? Because you got to remember, this is November 22nd, 1962. This is not
right. But even so, so many documentaries. I've watched many documentaries on the JFK assassination. There seems to be, sort of a lot of attempts by either private groups or whatnot through Freedom of Information Acts. And, just to really, and I think actually one of the documentaries was actually talking about the second shooter because of the audio noise, right? If I recall, is that
right from the Zapruder film, right? Yeah.
Right. Yep, exactly. And the one thing, obviously, especially with technology at the time, is that a second shooter, or is it sound ricocheting and being reverted back off of buildings? Again, this is a parade route. And here's the other thing too, if there is a second shooter, first of all, I think we all know that it was one shot, one kill with JFK, as far as one bullet hitting him in the back of the head. This second shooter, the only thing we'd really care for him, because I think right now, at least from what we know, there wasn't a secondary entrance that would contradict that there was a second one that was there. Now, let's just say that there was one. Let's give you that argument. Why are we really going to learn much other than maybe did they conspire or did they operate separately? At this point, it's 60 some odd years later.
And that's where you asked the question about angle of entry, because the first one, if I'm not mistaken, goes through his throat. And the second one, you can visibly see on the motorcade film where his skull, the portion of his skull comes off, and Jackie Kennedy tries to manage that. But but I find the JFK one, I think out of all of them, probably the most plausible or questionable, where you can ask, just because the time at which it happened. I think a lot of the ones about 9/11, I just get out of here with that. Those aren't even remotely,
no.
Yeah, I don't get that one. I'm just saying, Nick, in terms of conspiracies, that also definitely changed the way presidential motorcades are handled, the way that routes are handled,
Correct.
the way that it was the last open-aired motorcade that they had. But in terms of conspiracies, Nick, I would say with this episode, we absolutely killed it. If you want a conspiracy about that one, so Nick, did you have anything else that you wanted to add here for episode number 85? Kind of a unique show, to say the least.
It's a unique show, but again, I think, well, I'll close with this thought. Again, we talk here, all aspects of hockey, and there's certain things. I know you talked about this in the open, but there's sometimes these types of shows that happen, and we've always made it our mission to discuss the good and the ugly, and everything in between. And again, we hope that for the listeners / the viewers, that we know that there's no sort of agenda to this. There's no sort of that we want certain things to happen. We just want to throw out the truth. And, there's a reason why. Also know that we waited until this report came out. We wanted to be absolutely sure that, what we were relaying as facts, because in a broadcast media, there is, to me, and this is not true of every other medium, unfortunately, we're caretakers of the truth, and we take that responsibility very, very seriously. So, I appreciate those folks who follow us along, who understand that, there's good and bad in this world. And, we don't back down from the bad. And because ultimately we think, as you mentioned, that there's positive change that can be made from bad, that can lead to other things also, being improved in society and sports leagues and things around, even, just your family and whatnot. So at the end of it, again, we appreciate you being along again for episode 85. And, I'm pretty confident that next week it'll be a much more, I don't know if normal show is the best word, but a much more uplifting type show.
Yeah, well, we definitely cover and talk about the ugly, because we talk about ourselves all the time, Nick. So
yes, we do.
With that being said, episode 85, if you didn't get a chance to listen to episode 84, we had a lot of good tidbits about recapping the men's hockey weekend last weekend against the University of Wisconsin. We also had a healthy scratch interview with Caleb J. Peabody, who joined us. A great discussion. If you're a foodie and you're looking for some great food places in the Twin Cities, Nick Maxon and Caleb really had you covered in that one. A lot of fun in that 50-minute episode. And of course, next week, we're trying to work on a guest here, hopefully maybe getting a couple of guys on the show, but we'll have to see. But with that being said, for Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you in the den very soon.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL. A game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.